Okay. My name is Robert Lee Scherwitz,
And what is your date of birth, please?
9 October 1946.
And when did you enter the service, although we'll get into more of your career later?
I came in 1965, and I was a career airman, and I served for 26 years, got out in 1991 after the Gulf War.
And what was your rank when you retired?
Senior Master Sergeant, E8.
Okay. And my name is Rosemary Brock, and I'm the interviewer today. This interview is taking place on Thursday, November 12th, 2009 at 2:30 in the afternoon. And this interview is being conducted for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress. To begin with, Mr. Scherwitz, we'd like to know a little bit about your background in terms of your family. Where were you born, your schooling, your family, however you want to put it.
I was born Teaneck, New Jersey, in 1946. My father was a tool and die maker, and my mother was a homemaker at that time. I was number 4 at that time of the children, and my sister was born a few years later, so it was a total of 5 in our family. Early stages of my life, my parents moved once or twice, but I basically grew up in Pearl River, New York, which is just about 20 minutes outside New York City, right on the New York-New Jersey line, just on the west side of the Hudson River. And my schooling, my desire as I proceeded through school was to become an auto mechanic. I studied 2 years of auto mechanics, and I wasn't interested in going off to college. My thoughts then were to graduate, and I had already lined up to have someone front me the money and go into business with. He was going to front the capital, and I was going to operate and manage a car wash and auto repair station. And in 1965, about February, President Johnson enacted the troop increases for the Vietnam War, and it was about May, I believe, that they called all of the students, the male students, into the auditorium, and they released all of the students who had already been accepted at college from the auditorium, and the rest of us lined up and in front of the stage where our recruiters were sitting up on the stage behind their individual desks. I actually wanted to go in the Navy. I was a Sea Scout, went through all the scouting, Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts, and I was in Sea Scouts. My brother was in the Navy, and it was something I wanted to do. I wanted to go in the Navy. And I kind of chatted with the Navy recruiter for a little bit, and he said that it'd be at least 2 years before I could get into the Navy because he had met his quota. And obviously the Army and the Marines were over there saying, yeah, we'll take you, we want you. And then this guy in the back of the room stood up and says, don't pay attention to him, I'll hire you. And I didn't even know the Air Force existed. I thought it was still part of the Army Air Corps. It wasn't even a focus of mine. I wanted to go in the Navy. I already had my draft card. And, you know, the kids, we all talked. I mean, it was very obvious that why we were brought into the auditorium, what was going on. I mean, it was on the news, it was everywhere. And I just, at that point in time, I wanted to get it over with, do my tour, and get back so I could get on with my life. So I was looking to enlist and get it done. The Air Force recruiter did convince me that day to sign up, and I had already had my draft card. I was already 18. I was 18 the October before, and so it was obvious that I was either going to get drafted or enlist. So I chose the Air Force. with my mechanical background, he felt, and I had already taken my aptitude test and everything else by then. And he already had my record sitting in front of him, and he told me that he could get me in as a aircraft mechanic. And I said, that'll work along with what my desires and my skills and my interests were. To go back a little bit, I guess I gained my mechanical curiosity as about 9 or 10 years old. I was fixing all the lawnmowers in the neighborhood, tearing them down, rebuilding them, and putting them back together, and they ran. And the guy I kept going to, the lawnmower repair shop, to get the parts I needed and gaskets, later on, while I was going to high school, hired me. So that was my first job, was actually other than working at home, was at a lawnmower repair that I kept going to buy parts from. And he got tired of me doing that, so he decided to hire me.
Okay. So when did you actually leave for the service, and where did you end up for basic training, and tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I graduated in June, and one of the deals I worked out with the recruiter was that I'd at least stay home until after 4th of July. And sure enough, on the 6th of July, I was down Whitehall Street in New York, enlisting, and after we got done raising our hand, and they put us on a bus, took us over to the airport, and flew us down to Lackland Air Force Base in Texas. We did our basic training at Lackland, and one of the interesting things is when we arrived at Lackland, we were given our duffel bag and all of our clothes issue, and then marched off to the barracks where we were going to live. We got there, and here's this World War II barracks with boards across the door nailed to it with a condemned sign on it. And we took the condemned sign down, took the boards down, and moved in. A truck backed up, unloaded beds, mattresses, and everything else. And we went to bed that night. Next day, we started spit shining that place. And we built our own barracks. It was a very interesting and very learning process, because you take all these guys from different areas and everything else, they mix you up. A lot of us were from New York that were in our flight, and it was very unique. Now, I had been through scouts, and so I had some order, discipline, marching experience, and standing at attention, saluting, and the basics that even a scout would come with. And so I was always told, even from my brother, that when you go to boot camp, just play the game. And I did that, and I enjoyed it. It wasn't anything that was overbearing. Yeah, the TI would stand in front of you and scream and holler at you, but he was doing it to everybody, and it was just part of the game. And what it did is it took a whole bunch of what we called rainbows, because when you arrive there, everybody's dressed in their own civilian colored clothes. And then we get our heads shaved, and everybody's given the same uniform. Everybody looks alike. And basic training, as it's supposed to do, molded us. And
So you completed basic training, and from there?
I went to Shepherd Air Force Base in Texas, where I studied on learning how to maintain aircraft. We worked, it was Shepherd Air Force Base, and it was the 1 and 2 engine jet aircraft side of the school. They had lots of different aircraft schools at Shepherd. I was on the 1 and 2 engine jet aircraft. Worked on F-86s, F-84s, F-100s, and T-33s. That was about the newest airplanes that we had at tech school at that time. They gave us some lessons and stuff on other aircraft, but those are the ones that we practiced taking pumps off and putting them back on, and just doing basic maintenance and learning how to maintain an aircraft. After that, Graduated from there, and I went, my first duty assignment was at Selfridge Air Force Base in Michigan, just north of Detroit. And the interesting aspect there is that I arrived there, brand new, gee whiz, your eyes are, size of $50. Your first duty assignment, you're scared to death. And this old warrant officer, I reported in, and they kind of get you all ruffled up, and you're standing at attention and in front of the sergeant there, and everything is explained to you what you're there to do, and not to mess up, and you cut your apron strings at home. You left them at home. You belong to me now, and this is your new life. And everybody at that young stage goes through that, and it is a cutting of the apron strings, that you have to formulate your own life. And after the little formalities of the introductions and things, they settle you back and relax you. And this old warrant officer put his arm around me. He says, "Come on with me, son," and took me down, showed me what an F-106 looked like, walked me around, and made me feel comfortable. It was just a really unique experience. And it's kind of a mentoring. And if you look at it, when I got to Selfridge, there was a lot of things going on. It wasn't just the Vietnam War. We were a part of the NORAD defense system for North America. That's what the mission of the F-106 was. And I guess a lot of people see things in me all throughout my career that I didn't see in myself. And this warrant officer took me under his arm and pointed me in the right direction, and gave me some good advice. I was assigned, now I'm a one-striper at this point, Airman 3rd class. And I started to work for a sergeant. One of the things that happened during this Vietnam push was they took all the rank and sent it to Vietnam for the experience level. So what you had left was a 3-striper at that point, was a Airman 1st class, because at that period of time it was Airman Basic with nothing on your sleeve. Your first stripe was Airman 3rd class, then 2nd class, and then 1st class. Anyhow, I worked for a 3-striper, and he taught me how to inspect the airplane, and it's an on-the-job training. I had my 3 level coming out of tech school, which means my level of education and proficiency level training. And you had to work your way up to 5 level, and then a 7 level was later on as an NCO, and then later on in the supervisory level as a 9 level. So here I am as a 3 level trying to learn a brand new airplane, and still go out there and launch missions, working on the job training with this, like I said, this 3-striper. And one of the things that he told me that I've taken to heart even to today was, no matter what you do, take advantage of every opportunity offered to you. If somebody comes in and asks you to drive for the general, you volunteer. Now, in the Army, that means you're going to go drive a wheelbarrow and the games that they play. But in the Air Force, they take it a little bit different. They're looking for people who are going to step up to the plate. So I took his advice, and every opportunity, even during those first days, I volunteered to be an age driver in aerospace ground equipment, driving a farm tractor, towing the equipment from airplane to airplane. We had to rotate and learn all these different duties, not just crewing the airplane, but also handling all the ground support equipment and positioning it and getting it in the right place, so that during wartime condition, all these things were properly placed and in position. And then they came and asked, we're all sitting in a room, and they came in and asked, need a volunteer, and I just threw my hand up. And they took me out and trained me on how to drive a de-icing truck. There was a huge benefit there, because I got to drive the truck while the guy was on the boom in the middle of the snow and wind and ice, spraying the airplane with de-icing fluid. One of the benefits of volunteering and learning how to drive and operate all different kinds of equipment. And I continued with that the rest of my career.
So as far as being at Selfridge, how long were you actually there, stationed there?
I left there I got there in latter part of '65. One of the squadrons there, I was assigned to the 94th Tactical Interceptor Squadron, which was the old Eddie Rickenbacker Hat in the Ring Squadron. Lots of great history. The 91st, called the Flying Fists, transferred from Selfridge down to Rich's Gabor in Kansas City, Missouri, and that was probably in early part of '67. Yeah, '67, because things happened fast. So I transferred down to Rich's Gabor in probably January '67, and I had, once again, I was working on F-106s, doing the same job, only with a little more responsibility now, because I had already gotten a second stripe by that point, and I was crewing all on my own without any supervision. I was running an expediter truck, which is a truck that manages the flight of airplanes, probably about 8 airplanes to a flight, and you monitor and manage the resources to get the airplanes ready for flight. And after I was there for a short period of time, I then got my orders for Southeast Asia, but I wasn't trained on the Phantoms that they were sending over there. So I had to go to tech school down in MacDill. Well, having gotten my orders, I had met a girl when I was up at Selfridge, and we had been talking about marriage, and we were planning marriage. And when I got the orders, that kind of moved our dates up. So in July of 1967, right in the middle of the Detroit riots, I married my wife. And so we have a very interesting anniversary that coincides with the Detroit riots. In fact, it'll come up again later on as we talk about the history, but it was July 28th. I took my wife on a 75-day honeymoon while I was at tech school, going to school at about 4 o'clock in the morning till about noon, because they were running 24-hour classes a day to get all the students through to get them over to Vietnam. And while I was in school, she was slept in and took care of things, and we had a wonderful vacation, enjoying what Tampa, Florida, and that region had to offer. October of '67, finished school, drove her up to Detroit. I went out to San Francisco to get on the Big Bird to fly over to Thailand, where I was being reassigned for the war. And my experience in California was quite interesting. Wearing my uniform, touring the city, I had about 2 days before I got on the airplane. I figured if I was going, I wanted to at least see California and San Francisco if I never saw it again. And the interaction with the people at that time was, yeah, I got looks and some snubbing, but it wasn't as bad as everybody else may have gotten. It may have been where I was. I went down to Haight-Ashbury. I did the typical San Francisco tours. It wasn't that bad. There was some snubbing, That's a polite way of saying it. Got on the plane and flew over to Bangkok, Thailand, and took a C-130 from Bangkok. I reported in. There was a reporting station there. Reported in, and they put me on a 130 going up to Ubon, Thailand, which is just west of the Mekong River along the border with Laos. And arrived there, reported in to the 555th Tactical Fighter Squadron. It was flying F-4 Phantoms at that time, and got issued all my gear, got put in a bunk, and went to work the very next day. Reported down to the flight line and started working with another guy for about 2 weeks, and then I was turned loose on my own airplane. Once I got to know where, the lay of the land, they put me on my own airplane there, where we were launching combat missions up north. During that period of time, the pilots were flying 100 missions, and then they got to go home, where the enlisted troops and the ground troops and such stayed for a year. But pilots, if they flew 100 missions, they went home during that period of time. A great outfit to come to. I was at the 8th Tactical Fighter Wing at Ubon, Thailand. Robin Olds had just left there. He was a big name MiG killer. Chappie James, the first black general of the Air Force, was there. I actually strapped Chappie James into the cockpit, and what a unique experience. He's a big man, and all the enlisted guys loved him. To reminisce on just Chappie for a moment, New Year's Eve, and I think it was it had to be 1967. New Year's Eve, the wing commander tried to close down the NCO club because things were getting rowdy, and Chappie James stepped in and discouraged him from doing that. In fact, he spent the rest of the night singing on stage with the band that was playing. He was a real enlisted man's guy. He was a colonel at that time. And early '67, getting there, we're launching airplanes, flying bombing missions, MiG cap missions. One of the unique things that I think I want to express on was when we were flying MiG cap missions, every time the airplane took off, when they're flying MiG cap, they had outboard wing tanks, 360-gallon Sergeant Fletcher wing tanks. And that was just the manufacturer name. And when they came back, they were always missing, because they'd always punch them off and then do dogfights with the MiGs, try to shoot them down. Well, every time we launch an airplane, we go down to the fuel farm and pick up a set of empty tanks and lay them against the wall, so that when the airplane came back, we'd hang new tanks on while the airplane was being reloaded with bombs and refueled and launched again within hours. Typical work day was about 12 hours, sometimes 13, because of the intricacies of trying to brief the guy that's going off and the other guy that's coming on. We had 1 day off a week, and it was not any one day. It was how they scheduled it, how they flowed it. Maybe you worked 6 days 1 week and 7 the next, depending on what the mission requirements were. Been there and was doing a good job there. The chief of maintenance, we had transferred. I came in being trained on the F-4D models and at MacDill, and that was because they were sending all the D models from MacDill to the base I was located at. They had transferred the original airplanes that they sent in early, which was the F-4Cs, and they had transferred all the airplanes out paperwork-wise. But there was still one airplane left that was sitting over in the boneyard that had been cannibalized to death. In order to keep an airplane flying, if you don't have a part, you took it off another airplane that was already broke, to keep those combat missions flying. And that was called cannibalization of parts to keep the fleet flying. And most of the desire was to order the part, find out that it wasn't coming, that it was going to be having to come from the States, and then take that paperwork and process the paperwork for the cannibalization of that part to put it on the other airplane. And then you'd have documentation and an audit trail of what was missing off of that airplane. But if you needed a portion of a larger part, typically what happened was they took the whole assembly, removed it because they had to get that off in order to get to the part you needed, and then just take the whole assembly and put it on the other airplane, and then put the other part on a bench someplace where it would miraculously disappear piece by piece to go on other airplanes. So there was a lot of what we called unauthorized K-balls. Well, this aircraft, 819, was the last C model F4C at UBON at that time. Been paperwork transferred, but it hadn't been properly transferred physically because it was just a shell. There wasn't panels on it, the skin was cut off of it, lots of missing parts, and I say lots. Over 300 legalized cannonballs were taken off it, and there's probably another 1,000 that weren't even legal, let alone all the nuts, bolts, and washers and spacers and everything else that you needed. Well, there were 3 other crew chiefs that were assigned to the airplane and then got fired because they weren't making any progress, and the chief of maintenance, the colonel that's in charge of all the airplanes to keep them up to maintenance specifications and good flying order, he was getting his butt chewed from higher headquarters because they had transferred this plane paperwork-wise, and the location where they transferred it was screaming and hollering that, hey, we got the paper, but we don't have the airplane. So higher headquarters told the colonel he had 90 days to get that airplane airborne and transferred. And like I said, they had gone through 3 other crew chiefs trying to get it fixed. And when he got this 90-day notice, and like I said earlier, there were people that saw things in me that I didn't see in myself. And my supervisor said he wanted me to take on a job that 3 other people had been fired from, and took me in and introduced me to the chief of maintenance. And he sat me down and he says, I'm going to give you the hardest job you've ever had, and maybe ever will have. And he said, I need this airplane flying, and it was now 89 days. And he told me, he says, if you need anything, you no longer work for your supervisor here. You work directly for me. My rank is carried with you. Whatever you need, anybody gives you any stonewalling or any problem, you come see me. And what I need you to do is put that airplane back together and get it flying in 90 days. And I said, I'll do the best I can. He says, that's all I can expect. Well, the first day I went out there, that same day, I went out there and I started looking at what we needed. We got the airplane had already been moved into a maintenance dock, meaning nothing more than it had 2 walls and a roof. Both ends were open, but it was undercover, out of the sun, out of the rain. That's huge because everything else was being fixed out on the ramp. The first parts I got, I laid on the bench, and I went home for the night, and came back next day, and those parts were gone. I went and told Colonel, I said, hey, Colonel, somebody stole the parts I went over to supply and found, and and they're already gone. He says, what do you need? He says, I need somebody to guard the airplane. He says, you got it. I had 24-hour security police guard on that airplane with a rope on either end of the hangar, and nobody got in there. As I kept accumulating parts, and I had to report to them every day what progress I had made and everything else and what I was doing. I said, I'm going out and getting parts, but I can't go get parts and still put the airplane back together. So he says, done. He went and got a crew, now I'm a 3-striper at this point. He went and got a tech sergeant of a phase dock crew. Now, phase dock is a area where you take the airplane off of the flying schedule, put it into maintenance, phased maintenance, and you do periodic inspections, time inspections, things that have so many operating hours, and you disassemble the airplane, you put it back together, inspect it, sign it off, and give it back to the crew chiefs to fly war missions. Well, he took an entire dock, the supervisor, who was a tech sergeant, and I guess about 4 or 5 guys, and they worked for me, a 3-striper. And actually, they worked for the bird colonel, because remember, he told me I was wearing his rank. Whatever I needed, I would get. All I had to do is tell him what I needed. So this tech sergeant took over putting the parts together, and between us, I mean, his background knowledge and experience, he would tell me what he needed the most in order to try to put some assembly back together here. And he would give me a list of things that he needed. I was given a supply card from the colonel. He introduced me to the commander of the supply that was on the other side of the base, and I was given an access card to be able to walk around wherever I wanted throughout supply, find a part that I needed that was on the shelf and or on the ground or wherever it was, and requisition it. Now, I had to do it properly. I was even given a computer access code. So I could actually process, once I got experience at it, I would go through, pick up the part I needed, walk through, enter it into the computer, fill out the paperwork, and leave with it. And that's where I spent most of my time. And then going out to other crashed airplanes and taking parts off of them and making them available so that we could use them. Working all the way through this with the tech sergeant and the maintenance crew, putting the airplane back together, and I worked with them on a regular basis, putting parts on and everything else. It was a team effort. The 90th day, I climbed into the back seat with the pilot, and we did a high-speed taxi check, meaning that we would run down the runway as if we were going to take off, get weight off of wheels, but keeping the wheels still on the ground, and then abort the takeoff and come to a stop at the other end, just to test it, to make sure that everything was functioning and everything, so that if they did try to take it off, they'd, have that capability. So we call it a high-speed taxi check. And that was the 90th day. We didn't get it flying, but we got it down the runway. And it was about the 120th day, we continued working on the airplane, tightening it up, tweaking it up, getting most of our problems were electronic, trying to get all of the proper electrons flowing through the wires to all the equipment at all the right levels and without resistance. Because this airplane had been left exposed to the weather, there were a lot of electrical connections that were just high resistance that had to be found. And you could only find them if you went out and tested them. So we did a lot more tests, but by the 120th day, we flew the airplane out of there to its new location. And shortly thereafter, I got a vacation. I was working during that whole period of time, with the incentive that this was my job. I didn't report to anybody other than that colonel. My duty hours were mine. I was probably putting in about 18 hours a day, and longer sometimes if I was on the trail of something, or trying to get something moved from supply over, or taking it off of another airplane. But got everything all put back together, and they gave me a flight on a C-47 up to Chiang Mai, up in northern Thailand, as a R&R, so to speak, for about 3 days. And what a beautiful city. The women are fair-skinned, Chinese-Thai mix. Miss World had come from there. I don't know what year it was, but they were still proud of that. Just a beautiful paradise away from all that hustle and bustle of the combat missions and everything else going on. there is beauty in Southeast Asia, and I got a chance to see it.
Now, after you got through with that project, what else was going on this base?
Well, we're still fighting missions and everything else. I went back to crewing airplanes and launching airplanes. I'm proud to say that every airplane that I launched came home. Now, having said that, we had a lot that didn't.
In terms of the base there, when everything was going on, what was daily life at the base like for everyone? What did you do on your off hours?
Sure.
Of course, during that period of time, when you're working 18 hours, I can
Yeah,
imagine.
well, that period of time came back and things got back to normal. It was interesting, being in the Air Force, we all get kid about our chow halls and our clubs and our golf courses. But when the CBs come in to build a runway, they build all the rest of the stuff to go along with it. So we're very fortunate, one of the reasons why I joined the Air Force. But life was interesting. I was at Ubon, I was in a two-story barracks, concrete with louvered air flow through it. So we had good air circulation and good protection from the elements. And it was either raining or just sweaty hot. We had water buffalo walking around the barracks area, keeping the grass trim. We had a houseboy that would polish our shoes every day, and we'd give them our clothes to wash and iron, and they'd take and iron our fatigues using banana leaves for starch. They'd take the hot iron and press the banana leaf, and the juices from the banana leaf would go into the fatigues and give them like a starch effect. The interesting aspect of that was, if you were caught out in the rain, you'd sit there and foam up. So it was one of the interesting aspects. The other thing I liked was we had a lot of kids that, the mama-sans, the workers on the air base would bring their kids along, and they'd babysit. Collectively, one would babysit, and the others would take care of scrubbing down the showers or ironing or such. And I asked my wife to send me little things, little penny candy, little toys, just to give these kids, and I enjoyed that portion of it. That having the interaction and with the kids, and away from the grudge of the flight line. So it was two worlds. When you left the flight line, being in Thailand, you were able to actually leave the job behind you. Another interesting aspect was it cost you a nickel for a beer, but cost you a quarter for a Coke. So there was a lot of beer being drank over there. I actually preferred wine and Papa vodka. 90 cents would get you a 40-ounce bottle of Papa vodka. In fact, we even had bottle bags. We would go off the field into town, and we'd take a bottle of, I'd take vodka with me, and we had a belt that everybody, all the little local sew-on shops would make for you, and you put your bottle in this bag, and it was secured to your belt so you wouldn't drop it, and you wouldn't have to carry it in your hands. Left your hands free to hold on to the baht bus. Baht is a nickel in Thai money, and it costs you a nickel to go into town with a baht. So the nickel bus, or the baht bus, would take you into town. And the reason everybody had these bottle bags and carrying a bottle of vodka with them, which was the preferred, was if you ordered a Coke downtown or Sprite, actually it was, most of it was kind of dry that I was drinking. The ice that they used, they got out of the local river to make the ice, so it was infected, so you use the vodka to kill it, just so you get some ice in your Coke. So you always, whatever you drank, you put some vodka in, no matter what it was. And just one of those little interesting aspects of daily life. Going downtown was interesting. Once again, we weren't in a war zone. At that point in time, there had been no air bases attacked in Thailand, and it was a shopper's paradise. We spurred the economy. The American dollar was well spent in Thailand, and one of the things I bought my wife as a gift was bronzeware. Think of silverware, only make it out of bronze with rosewood handles in a full case. Was one of the big items that a lot of guys bought, let alone the elephants and all the other things that you've seen throughout your life that guys have brought back from Southeast Asia. All that was available. If you could think it up, they could make it. They could carve it, they could paint it. I took a photograph of my wife and I from our wedding day at the reception. There was a curtain behind with flowers and things on it. And I gave them a black and white photo, and they blew it up and colorized it with watercolor, I suspect. But they colorized it. And to my amazement, when I came back, it was real close to what the colors were on the curtain. And so that was one of the other talents that they had that was really reasonable. Labor was real cheap, so your dollar would go very far. One of the other things that I brought back was temple rubbings, that the people around the temples, the people trying to make a living, would take a cloth, lay it across the carvings on the temple, and then take crayons and such and do the outlines or rubbings. And cost you $0.25 for a rubbing. And I bought a whole bunch of them, just the fabric, rolled it up and sent it back to the States. My wife had them framed and everything else, and we got back, and she told me she spent $65 to frame the two 25-cent each drawings that I sent her, and I almost went ballistic. Once again, back in the 60s, we weren't making much money. But she told me, don't worry. He offered me $350 for the set. So I've still got them.
So how far was the base from the town?
Probably about a 15-minute ride. It wasn't far. You could actually walk it, but it was for a nickel. It was easier to take the bus. The other aspects was the interaction, the food, getting to eat in the restaurants and such was just a fabulous experience.
Now, the year that you were there, the 13 months that you were there, did you spend your entire time at UBON?
No, about May of, in fact, it was May of 1967, the 555th Tactical Fighter Squadron relocated from Ubon and went up to Udon, Thailand, northwest of where Ubon is. And Udon is just south of Vientiane, once again along the Mekong River, actually closer to Hanoi. A lot of activity going on up there. We had Air America up there. We had a lot of other activities and Special Operations Squadron activity going on out of there. But yeah, we prepared to leave Ubon, and once again, in their ultimate wisdom, they said, Lee, we want you to stay behind and launch out the last combat missions and get the last of the equipment and load it up on the last C-130 that'll come in to pick you up. So myself and about 4 other guys that I was in charge of, we launched out the last airplanes on the last mission out of there and gathered up the support equipment, palletized it, and we knew that the C-130 wasn't going to come back and pick us up till later on that afternoon. So we decided to walk back up on base to go to the club to go get something to eat and maybe something to drink. And we're walking past the Squadron Ops building, and here was the 555th Tactical Fighter Squadron flag still flying on the flagpole. So we formed a little formation, and we properly lowered the flag, saluted properly, and folded it up. And I kind of tucked it inside my shirt, and we went up to the club and had lunch and enjoyed ourselves for a little bit, and came back down to catch our airplane to go up to Udorn. We arrived at Udorn, and the back tailgate comes down on the C-130, and here's the squadron surrounding the C-130, waving a brand new flag and welcoming us. And I said, "Oh, gee whiz, this old ragged flag has been replaced. I still have it." After getting off the airplane, my good old supervisor there, the same one that volunteered, asked me to go put the other airplane back together, asked me if I'd take on another project, and that was they having arrived at this new location. They hadn't planned on who was going to be in the control room at night to manage the fleet of airplanes. So he asked me if I would go ahead and work that night shift, and he would see about getting a replacement in there for me. I worked there that night, and I obviously knew all my airplanes. I knew all the guys on the other end of the radio. What I was in was a closed-up room, no windows, with a plastic board with all the aircraft tail numbers listed on there, and all the maintenance requirements that were needed, all the load requirements that were needed. At 11:30 every night, we would get the new frag order for the next day, and we would then, frag order meaning what the mission requirements were, and then we would load the airplanes according to what the targets were. And so that was our job at night, was to make sure that all these things happened in a sequence that need to happen for it to be successful, and track all the maintenance going on. So evidently I must have done a good job that night, because the supervisor of the control room asked my supervisor if he could keep me. And he came over to me and said, "These guys, you did too good a job. These guys are asking to keep you. He said, we would like you to stay in here, because that gives us a friend inside the control room who knows everybody else out there." So I stayed. And shortly thereafter, I was transferred out of the 555th Tactical Fighter Squadron into the 432nd TAC Recon Control Wing. And my job there was a maintenance control operation controller. And my job, like I said earlier, was to manage the fleet of airplanes that were being handled out on the flight line. That was a really unique experience. I was given an opportunity in that control room to work along with the other fighter squadrons, along with the 20th TASS, along with the Special Operations Squadrons. We interacted with Air America. We interacted with a lot of special operations that were going to take place or did take place. I got an opportunity to see a piece of the bigger picture. It really was a unique experience that, once again, I took full advantage of. I went knowing what was going on, and who was doing what and when and where. I got an opportunity to fly on a lot of different airplanes, on a lot of different, we'll call them training opportunities, to where I could jump on board. They weren't going anywhere I couldn't go, and they weren't going to do anything I couldn't be along for. So I took those opportunities and jumped on board, and saw a lot of things, and had a lot of opportunities.
What was Air America, and what did they do?
Air America, very interesting operation. The CIA operated a clandestine war even long before we got involved heavily into the Vietnam War. Air America was a CIA operation that they actually went out and bought a fleet of airplanes, and for the good of Southeast Asia, and I say Southeast Asia because they supported Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, and South Vietnam with providing sacks of rice, airborne drops, lots of public affairs, moving the special operations troops in and out of places that marked military airplanes couldn't go. They flew into locations deep in the jungle that, in fact, there was a movie out called Air America that, taking Hollywood for what it is, but a lot of the scenes that you saw were very typical of what they had to deal with. But landing on a small hilltop to bring in rice to a community that was providing us intelligence support by keeping them fed and with our ammunition and guns. They also kept us informed of troop movements and such. There were other operations going on. They were also training Thai and Laotian military personnel how to fly the T-28s, A-1Es and A-1Hs and helicopters and lots of French-type airplanes and any type of airplane that they could get their hands on that could be used to go into short, small fields in the jungles and such. That would probably take a whole day to try to explain to you all their operations, but just if I tell you that there were CIA operations going on, but a lot of good operations along with the combat operations, lots of great things that they did. One of the operations that's no longer classified that was CIA supported was we had Site 85, Lima Site 85 in Laos, that was not far from the Vietnamese border and or Vietnam border in Laos, up in the northeast corner. We had LORAN transmitter site up there for giving the airplanes the capability to triangulate and flight navigation capabilities while they were fighting the war, whether they were coming out of Thailand or South Vietnam or wherever they were flying. This antenna site was used for giving them navigation capabilities to go in and get their targets, whether they were supporting ground troops or specific targets that they were going after. We sent in a CH-53 from the 20th, and this was before I got there. So this had already happened before I got there, but the stories were very vivid, and the ramifications were still there when I was in the control room. We set with the CH-53, they took 150 tons of radar equipment that had been specially palletized so that they could lay it in there with a helicopter and just hook them up together with cables that had already been pre-positioned or pre-established so that they could go in, set it in there, and start operating. This radar that they put in at the site gave the fighter planes an all-weather capability to go up and attack up north and to support ground troops. The strategic location that they had was on a high plateau mountaintop, and it was pretty well protected simply because of its geographic tower that it sat on, basically. And I say tower, it's a landmass that just formed very, very narrowly at the top. So it was easily defended. The early part of 67, I'm sorry, let's see, 67. I'm not going to try to give you a date without reading it. Anyhow, this site, Lima Site 85, was attacked by a group of commandos that came in there and overwhelmed the site. We were able to evacuate about 11 of the troops that were there manning it, both CIA and Air Force troops. And once they got evacuated, those that they could, they came back in and dropped tons and tons of bombs on the site, as well as napalm and all kinds of different ordnance to destroy the radar so it wouldn't fall into enemy hands. It was the largest Air Force casualties of the war.
Was that site?
Was at that site.
Was that the most memorable thing that you remember of your time in Southeast Asia? Or is there one?
Well, memorable of Southeast Asia, I think the Mig Kills. We had launched an airplane, and this happened on a regular basis. The Mig Kills were big. I mean, it's just like winning a big football game. When your mission is to go out there and shoot down other aircraft, MiGs, it's, you know, it's the home run, it's the kick between the goalposts, the win. And when the airplanes came back after shooting down a MiG, they would get permission from the tower that there were no airplanes taking off or anything, that the airfield was clear, and they would just burn across the top of the flight line and pull up and do spiral rolls. The one that is outstandingly conscious in my memory was there was a flight of several airplanes that came in. They had just completed a fabulous mission. They had gotten a couple MiGs, and they flew across the airfield, and the recon aircraft that were with them were popping their flash carts. And flash cart is like a flash bulb for a camera, only it's a white phosphorus ball of fire that goes out that illuminates the sky, okay, so that they can get good picture. Well, they flew right over the air base, and they were popping these carts, and then right behind them was the two F-4s that both had gotten MiG kills, and they went off and did spirals. That was probably the most memorable quasi-air show. And I guess the other memorable experience was in November 1967, the Bob Hope show. Raquel Welch, Bob Hope, we'd all grew. When I first got there, they immediately told me, you got to start growing a handlebar mustache. When a Bob Hope show comes, Jerry Colonna, who was a sidekick of Bob's, always had a handlebar mustache. And we're all going to grow handlebar mustaches and try to do a presentation to him. Well, Jerry had gotten sick for that trip and couldn't make it, but we put a collage together and gave it to Bob Hope to take back to him with pictures of all the guys that had grown handlebar mustaches in honor of Jerry. The interesting aspect of the Bob Hope show was that I had worked night shift that night, and all the guys that are on day shift gave me their cameras. So I had like, I don't know, 8 or 10 cameras hanging around my neck, had an ice chest, because we got there about 4 o'clock in the morning. I was already in the third row, and I was sitting next to some Aussies, and we watched the show. It was fabulous. It's everything.
Now,
You can't listen to White Christmas without crying if you've been there. I don't care where you are. If you listen to White Christmas, you're going to shed a tear if you've been to one of his shows. But anyhow, everybody disbanded after the show, and I'm picking up gear and trying to get everything all together. One of the stagehands comes over to me and says, you going anywhere? He says, no, I'm trying to get everything together here so that when the guys come back to pick me up, I'm ready to go. He says, Bob Hope would like to interview you. What, me? See how he didn't pick you in particular. He's go out there and find somebody. They told us, you're here. You want to be interviewed by Bob Hope? Sure. You know. So they stagehands grabbed the ice chest, and one of them took all but my camera and set them aside for me. He says, don't worry about this stuff. We've got it covered. And I went back with Raquel Welch and Les Brown, and all the rest of the Miss America was there, just the whole crew. And Bob was in a side room there, and he was doing interviews with other people already. And I got to drink some champagne with him, and I took a whole bunch of pictures. And when it was my turn to go in, I sat down with Bob Hope, and I thought in my mind that he was actually going to send this to my wife. You know, like you see that the guys do on Christmas shows and stuff during the little commercial segments. Hi, hello, this is Lee from Thailand, Germany. What, Merry Christmas. Sue and family, I love you, miss you, bye. No, it was a sit-down interview with him, and it was recorded. And he wanted to know how things were going and everything else and what I was doing, and from the real personal level. Yep, that was another highlight. And I guess I should point out that it wasn't all war. While at UBAN, I had been raised Lutheran and married into the Catholic Church. So while I was over there, I was taking confirmation class with the Catholic Church, so I'd have a unified religious family. And so my involvement there got me involved with the chaplain and a group of other people that, you know, palled around, and we got together. And what we did is we went down to the local village, Uban, and the chaplain found out from one of the priests down there that this one of the schools down there needed some assistance. A school in Thailand during that period of time, and this was a good one, was a, think of a pole barn with a concrete floor with poles around the side, and then a corrugated steel roof, no walls, and just corrugated steel, and a chalkboard out in front, and the kids would sit on the floor on the little bamboo mats. And in the hot sun, the corrugated steel was just roasting the kids. So I don't know who came up with the idea, but after looking at it, we figured out that all we need to do is our missiles that were shooting at all these MiGs came in big styrofoam containers. And if we took two halves of that and just strapped them up, nailed them up with strips of wood and such, we could insulate the roof. So we did that. We went down there, and probably over a course of 4 days, that we, you know, it took about 4 weeks, but it took about 4 days for us to do that project. And we put the styrofoam underneath this corrugated steel and put strapping across to hold it in place. And it improved the quality of sitting in there under the hot sun immensely. It cooled it off immediately because you got all this cross ventilation. Well, it was shortly thereafter that the mayor of Uban, he's called the Puyaban, that means mayor in Thai, and he invited us to the village where he grew up, where he was born and grew up. The way we got there was dugout canoe with a motor on the back, and we went upriver and landed at this little village on the shore there. And here's the ladies washing in the river, and washing clothes, and kids playing and fishing. And we climbed up on the shore and went into the village, where we were greeted with a mat for us to sit on in the shade of the trees. And we proceeded to spend an entire afternoon of being entertained by the local villagers, doing Thai culture native dances, singing, dancing. They invited us, they showed us how to dance, they invited us up to dance. I did. It was all great fun. Of course, they had this big bowl that we were all drinking from too. It was rice wine, homemade rice wine from the village, which gave me the courage to eat some of the food after we had drank enough. One of the things I found is I was eating this meal. Think of wheat tina. That's the closest thing I can think of, consistency and color. That was seasoned with live red ants. And I at first thought it was bad. You know, the ants had taken over. He said, no, 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 we put those in special for seasoning. Well, red ants are citric, so they use them just like lemon. Now, if you can get past them crawling around in your mouth before you can kill them, you know, that's why we drank enough rice wine before we did that. But there was some stuff that we knew we shouldn't eat, like the fish, but we ate a lot of the fruit and vegetables and things. But that was the one thing that I stepped out on. And like I said, it took a lot of rice wine, though, before I'd try it.
You mentioned watching the Bob Hope show, sitting next to Aussies. Were these?
Yeah, we had Australians. Now remember, the Vietnam War was fought not just by the Americans, but we had Koreans, we had Australians, New Zealand troops. We had Aussies on base with us. They were flying missions. In fact, they did a lot of missions with the CIA, and they just don't try to outdrink them. They had a pet kangaroo that they had brought with them, and that was their mascot. And every now and then they'd bring them over to the NCO club and sneak them in. But yeah, we had a lot of fun with the Aussies. At Ubon, I hung around with we had T-28s there that the Thais were flying. And I made friends with a crew chief from Thailand, from the Thai Air Force, who spoke enough English to get by. And I palled around with them quite a bit, not all the time, but when I was invited, and we'd see each other and we'd get together, and probably not a couple times a month, we'd get together and get downtown for dinner. So I would go with the Thais. I'm the only American going with them. And we're eating not where the Americans are eating, but where they go to eat. And they're having fun introducing me to all their Thai foods and stuff. And I might warn anybody, don't try eating the clear hot sauce with little beads floating in it. Simply because I knew I could eat it, I stayed away from the fish items. Ate a lot of fruit and vegetables. Cow pot. Cow pot was probably for a nickel, you could get a baht. You could get a plate of cucumbers, lettuce, onions, that's one of the interesting meals that I ate.
Now, when you were there during those 13 months, how did you stay in touch with your wife and your family back home? Communication.
Any help there?
Mars
Station, there we go. And you'd get in line at night, and you wait your turn to get on a radio that you call back. It was I think it's HF radio, high frequency radio, I believe it was. And I got to tip my hat to Barry Goldwater. He ran a voluntary, he paid for all the money for this. He set up a Mars station at his house and had volunteers come in and operate it. We would call by radio to his house on the Mars radio frequency, and then plug us in on a telephone, which he paid for, to call from, it was out west someplace, Arizona I think it was, to Michigan where my wife was. And what we tried to do is via letter, we'd pre-coordinate, I'm going to try to get in touch with you such a time, knowing what my schedule was, and she'd try to be home during that period of time. And we always reserved one night that she would be home that I would try to get through, and try to do that about once a month. They wouldn't let you call weekly. There were too many guys trying to get through and not enough radio space. But the other thing is we had the 3-inch reel-to-reel tapes that we sent back and forth Those were the real communication aspects. That's where you could sit down and just comfortably talk to each other. But the information was always about 3 or 4 weeks old, but it was always great to hear that voice.
So you got mail and you had these 3-inch reels
Yep.
plus the Mars system.
Yep. And when I was up at Udorn, I don't think I told you about the attack that we had. In July 27th, Udorn Air Base was attacked by sappers. That was the first attack on on American forces air base in Thailand. And the sappers, the attackers came in and tried to blow up a C-141 that was on the end of the runway, sitting in a holding area, waiting for POWs that were supposedly going to be released from Hanoi, and they were going to be helicoptered in and put on a C-141 and flown to Hawaii to get them out of there. So that airplane was standing by, and then we had an F-4 Phantom on the test pad near the end of the runway also, where we tie the aircraft down to a big cable mounted in the ground, and we test the engines at full RPM and afterburner to fine-tune them for operation. Well, the attackers came in at about 10:30 at night. Well, I went on at 11 o'clock at night, and I lived on the other side of the runway. This is on the northwest corner of the airfield, and I'm living on the southwest corner of the airfield. And I'm on my way to work on the back of on a motorcycle, and I'm coming around the end of the runway, and I'm looking at all these bright little lights coming towards me, just kind of flashes of light. Wow, that's interesting. And I continue on, go to work, and I go inside and says, "What are you doing here? Don't you know we're under attack?" No. Yeah, that was the first attack we were at, and we lost several people, and the equipment, the airplanes were able to be repaired. The 141 had a lot of fuel leaks in it, and they wanted to get that asset out of there fast. So they took wooden pegs and plugged up the fuel leaks and flew it out of there back down to Bangkok for repair.
Was that the only time either base had been attacked?
That's correct. Now, there had been other airplanes shot at, landing and taking off, but none of the bases had ever been attacked.
So when your tour ended in November of '68, how'd you feel? Well, can you explain a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, my tour was supposed to end in October, but my replacement didn't come, and you couldn't leave until your replacement came. And to this day, I don't know, doesn't make any difference. He didn't come, and by the time they could get another replacement in, it took about another 30 days to route somebody through the system to replace me. Glad to go home. Leaving the war. The music said it all. Leaving on a jet plane, going home. The sign of the times, the music of the period all meant something to us, because all those words to all those songs all took a personal chime. The sign of the times. I flew down to Bangkok. I actually had an extra day in Bangkok. I got to go down to Bangkok a day early before my flight left out, and I got a chance to run around downtown Bangkok looking at the sights and things. I'd done that one other time also. I took another 3-day R&R, went there, and in fact, let me back up a minute. We'll come back to leaving. Before I came back, I got an assignment for Homestead Air Force Base, Florida, notification. And they said, okay, this is about 60 days before you're ready to rotate. And they offered me an assignment to Homestead Air Force Base south of Florida. And I said, originally my wife and I talked about, just doing the one hitch and getting out. There wasn't any jobs. The economy was real weak during that period of time. The Detroit News, where my wife was at, had been on strike for years, and there was a lot of unemployment. The job market was weak, and I was stepping out of the war into civilianhood without much light at the end of the tunnel. So we talked it over and decided, I had to take the assignment or I'd be discharged right at San Francisco when I arrived back. So we decided, we'll do one more tour, 4 more years, and I'll be in the States and I'll be able to then see what jobs are available and network and try to find a job. And the excitement of going down to live in Florida had some interest, so we went ahead and took the assignment. And so leaving out of Thailand, going to back home and then on to my assignment at Homestead, obviously I flew back through San Francisco. I remembered what it was I wanted to say earlier about, so I had to re-enlist in order to take the assignment. I re-enlisted, and one of the things that they were giving at that time was I think it was about a $10,000 bonus if you re-enlisted, because they were trying to not lose people that were already trained. And they saw that the war was going to continue on for a while, and they didn't want a stop-loss program. So anyhow, one of the benefits of the war in the war zone in Vietnam was that if you were in Vietnam or over Vietnam, you get a month free, tax-free. So if you re-enlisted, they automatically arranged for you for a flight over Vietnam. And so I re-enlisted, jumped on the flight, and flew over to Okinawa, visited Okinawa for a couple days. There was a typhoon coming in, so I took a civilian flight. I couldn't get out of Okinawa, and I had to get back. So I jumped over to, on a civilian flight, I went over to Taiwan, and I went over to Chingchongkong, and caught a flight from Chingchongkong back to Bangkok, and then got me a C-130 ride back up to Ubon. And so, just the little things, but I got my re-enlistment bonus tax-free. Now, all the other guys that were fighting in Vietnam were getting every month tax-free, and they were more than happy I was more than happy to let them have it. I was very happy to be in Thailand. So anyhow, back to getting on the plane, going back to San Francisco. Arrived in San Francisco in uniform, 1505s, and I was greeted by all the hecklers, and it wasn't as I had left. They were waiting for us at the airport, welcoming us home with "Stop the War," all the protest signs, spitting on you. Nobody spit on me, but it could have happened, and I didn't see it. But yeah, I had to go through the gauntlet, and that was not fun. And got in that taxi cab. Actually, no, that was a bus first. I had to get from Traverse Air Force Base to San Francisco Airport to get on the civilian airplane. I had to get on we got on the bus, it took us out to the airport, but getting off the military bus to the terminal, I had to go through the gauntlet. That was not fun. Then flew home, and that's that trip.
And how much leave did you have before you had to report to your next duty station?
Oh, I think we took 30 days, and we took a nice slow trip down to Homestead and visited with family, obviously, and got to Homestead. And it was interesting. I was supposed to go out on the flight line and be a crew chief. When I reported in, they found out I had combat control room experience they put me right back in the control room, because they had nobody in the control room with combat experience, in the control room. And Homestead was interesting. While I was there 4 years, and obviously I stayed on as a career. I got lots more stories to tell, but I'll tie in with this one. At Homestead, one of the jobs that I had amongst doing all of my controlling and plans and scheduling, and it was still operated under a squadron concept where everybody was in the same squadron. We had our war readiness kits, our risk kits, with supply items ready to go, because the squadron concept was you could pick up a squadron and send them anywhere you wanted to, lock, stock, and barrel. Everybody was already assigned. You had supply people, you had medics, you had life support, you had pilots, you had maintenance personnel, weapons personnel. Everybody you needed to operate with, you operated with as a unit. And so we continued to operate that way. One of the other jobs I got was, we were friends with the Shah of Iran at that time, and we were supplying them with Phantom aircraft. And one of my jobs was to, because, I don't know, somebody saw something in me, I didn't see it myself. They asked me to go ahead and train these maintenance officers how to manage their fleet. Now, they had already been in the States for 4 years, gone to English language school, gone to maintenance officer school. Now they were getting a hands-on OJT, on-the-job training of how to manage a fleet of airplanes. And so my job was to train them on a one-on-one basis on how to maintain a fleet of airplanes and how to expect the unexpected, and workarounds and such, and lead times for supply items and such. And that was a very unique experience for me, which would later pay off in other challenging opportunities that the Air Force offered me.
So to wrap it up here, in terms of your, just the wartime experience, do you have any thoughts, any reflections 40 years later?
Best thing I ever did. Two things in my life that were extremely important to me, that shaped me, was enlisting. Wish I'd gone in as an officer. It pays a lot better. And for anybody else who's listening out there, if you're thinking about going in the military, get your education first and then go in as an officer. The pay is much more worth it. I trained a lot of officers. The other thing was, oh geez, senior moment here. What was the question?
With the benefit of 40 years
Oh,
to
looking
reflect back.
Oh, yeah, okay. Two things, was one, enlisting, and the other thing was, after I got out, using my GI Bill to go back to school. What a thrill to go back to school and see all the things, learn all the things I thought I knew. College is an interesting aspect of life. It's not the classes you take, it's the structure that they put you through. Obviously, the classes give you the slant in which you're going through. And I went through in an aviation business management aspect. I'm currently an airport manager. So I took all those skills that I learned all those years of the military and applied it. I found out I enjoyed managing people a lot more than bending wrenches, and I was better at it. And I found that people would surround me and want to work for me because I treated them the way I did as a team, a unity. We accomplished many great things over the years. But going back to school was another bright, shining light, and the GI Bill allowed me to do that.
Thank you. Is there anything that anyone else wants to say or wrap up here?
Any final comments or anything else you want to comment?
Part 2 will be at another day to talk about the rest of my career.